Hello and welcome. In this video, we're covering two consequence-based ethical theories, chapters 3 and 4 of Andrew Kernohan's Business Ethics. Both ethical egoism and utilitarianism fall under the umbrella of consequentialism. That means that they evaluate the morality of an action based on its outcomes. The main difference is in whose outcomes we care about, who has moral standing. So, what exactly is the difference between egoism and utilitarianism? Well, egoism focuses on the self, while utilitarianism considers everyone's happiness. Throughout these chapters, the whole book actually, Kernohan is making several assumptions, and the main one for us is that he assumes materialism. That is, the only way to talk about costs and benefits is in terms of stuff. He completely ignores all values that are not material. And that is one way to understand what's happening, but it's not the only one. And from a religious perspective, while the material world is important, it is certainly not the most important source of values. There are two major ways to think about ethical egoism, and our author presents only the first one. Narrow egoists are short-sighted and impulsive, acting in the moment, often selfishly. The problem here is not the selfishness, but the fact that the narrow approach only describes someone who is interested in immediate benefits, with no self-control or ability to delay gratification. This is, for lack of a better analogy, a crackhead frantically looking for their next fix. It's not the selfishness that prevents cooperation, as he notes, but the inability to think past the next 15 minutes or so. This kind of short-term egoism destroys trust and cooperation. In business or personal relationships, short-term gains often cause long-term losses. For example, you may cheat your customer today and make an extra $100, but you will lose all future business from them and maybe their friends. The variety of egoists that Kernohan ignores are broad egoists. These are long-term planners who recognize that trust, cooperation, and reputation are personally beneficial. If you think of the mob, or even main villains in movies, you'll notice that they have long-term plans and often follow broad egoism. They have plans, goals, and internal logic. They want to win in the long term, not just take what they can get in the moment. And to be fair, being a broad egoist does not itself make you a bad guy. Here's a fun example. You are not friends with everyone, and you don't want to be friends with everyone. So why do you make friends with some people and not others? Probably because the people you do make friends with have interests, behaviors, and ideas that complement your own. And so when you spend time together, you are getting something of value from that interaction, and they're getting something in return. That is, your friends add to your value and you add to theirs. And presumably, having such friends and treating them in certain ways is part of your value set. When we view it this way, it's suddenly clear that you can certainly be an ethical egoist and still have good friends, significant others, etc., while still being rational under your own value set. You only can't do that if your only value is immediate gratification without regard for the future. Interestingly enough, we can characterize most religious ideas as being very broadly egoistic, in the sense that a person's primary interest is supposed to be their own well-being, not in the sense of just seeking material pleasure though. But because that kind of well-being is achieved by fulfilling your purpose, your telos, and that purpose includes helping others, you would expect that the religious person seeks the good of others, but they do so because it is in their own interest. The next ethical theory is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism expands the concern from just yourself to all people. Every person's happiness and suffering gets a vote, and everyone counts equally. The way we decide how to act is by considering what actions are available to us, checking how much happiness and suffering each action produces, and then selecting the one that produces the most overall happiness. This promises a rational and measurable ethical system where we pick the choice that maximizes total well-being. So what is it that makes utilitarianism appealing? Well, it promises inclusivity, calculability, and neutrality. Inclusivity because everyone matters equally. Calculability because decisions are supposed to be measurable. You just add up happiness and suffering and see where you land. And neutrality because no group and no individual gets special treatment. And this sounds wonderful, but there are three major problems. The first one is that measurement is hard. Two people can go through the exact same experience objectively, but have a very different subjective experience as a result. So how exactly do we then count utility? If you've been to a hospital lately, you might have seen their very scientific, handy-dandy chart that asks you to rate your pain by pointing at different levels of frowny faces. So not exactly high-tech. Second, informed preferences are unreliable. We think we know what will make us happy, but we are often wrong. Consider how many people go to college and get degrees and then come to regret that decision later on when student loans come due and when they can see that the jobs that they're qualified for are not the sort of jobs that they want to do, or they don't pay the kind of money that they were hoping for, or that the jobs that they thought they wanted to do end up having all sorts of features that they did not know about and that they certainly don't want. But in a more lighthearted example, the British in India noticed that there was a lot of cobras about, and they decided that they want to get rid of these cobras. And so they came up with a fairly utilitarian way of doing this. And what they did is they put a bounty on dead cobras. So if you bring in a dead cobra, they would give you money. Sounds like a wonderful idea. With the best of intentions, what could possibly go wrong? But it turns out that once that bounty was made public, the people decided to start breeding cobras, and that way they had a steady income. And when the British realized what was happening, they ended the program, and the people who had bred those cobras just went ahead and released them back into the wild, back into the city. And so the total number of cobras in Delhi actually went up. The third problem with utilitarianism is that it denies any notion of rights. And as a result, there is no such thing as anything that is wrong in itself. The only way we can talk about right and wrong is in terms of whether or not it maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering. But that means that torturing someone or enslaving a group of people, so long as it would increase net utility, would be perfectly fine as an action to do for utilitarians. And that just feels wrong. We certainly want to be able to say that genocide and slavery and torture and sexual assault are always wrong. Not that it's wrong if it meets certain criteria. In both egoism and utilitarianism, the highest moral value is happiness. What changes is whose happiness matters the most. In egoism, it is your happiness. In utilitarianism, it's everyone's happiness. And this affects the kind of person that each theory encourages you to become, whether you will be self-focused or society-focused. Notice a fun little problem here. Consequentialism is a secular ethical theory. It's supposed to be based on nothing other than reason. However, there are several different varieties of it, and we can't agree on which one is right, or even if they're all wrong. And these differences are not the kind that you can solve by compromise, and that tells you something about the limits of reason and why our highest moral values are always stuck being assumptions.